Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Morgan and I teach New Mexico history and Latin American history here at Central New Mexico Community College. Today I want to talk just a little bit about the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic here in New Mexico. The past is always in conversation with the present. As we stay at home to lower the spread of COVID-19 in our New Mexico communities, when we're not helping our children with homework or caring for loved ones and family members, many of us think about how past pandemic events have played out so that we can gain insights into our current moment. Also, we recognize the heroic roles played by those whose jobs are now deemed essential. Healthcare professionals on the front lines of treating the virus, employees of grocery stores, restaurants, gas stations, auto repair shops, and so on. May our staying at home benefit those in the most vulnerable positions in our communities, and may we recognize the risks that those in essential fields are taking. Here in New Mexico, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has taken forceful, early steps to slow the spread of coronavirus. In her press conferences and official statements, she has given time to and cited the statements of experts in the New Mexico Department of Health. National news outlets, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, have cited our governor's leadership as an example to emulate. Yet, looking back to 1918, the year that the Spanish flu pandemic affected the globe, New Mexico was a fledgling state having recently gained U.S. statehood in 1912 that lacked a Department of Health. Instead, when the pandemic reached New Mexico in October of 1918, a loosely defined Board of Health with limited powers was all we had. The state board had to coordinate with county-level health officials. Each county was required to have at least one health officer, but many rural counties lacked trained physicians. The board had the authority to quarantine infected people, investigate health concerns, and appoint health inspectors, but its members had to work by persuasion because the board lacked legal authority to require action. Similarly, the recently minted state constitution contained no provisions to deal with the global pandemic. The worldwide pandemic came in three major waves. The first was relatively mild, and it spanned the spring and early summer of 1918. The second was the most deadly, lasting from late August to early 1919. The third was described as a, quote, relatively minor echo of the second. Because of a short incubation period, between 24 and 72 hours, the disease spread quickly. The first cases in New Mexico were registered in Carlsbad, Clovis, and Gallup, and the flu spread rapidly across the rest of the state. The first case in Santa Fe was registered on October 7, 1918, the first death in the state on October 11th. The worst of the wave seemed to end by the end of that month, but rural communities with few healthcare providers fared the worst. Because reporting methods were not the same as they are today, we have only estimates of the numbers of people who were afflicted by the disease. Of the population of about 360,000 in New Mexico, roughly 50,000 people, or about 14%, reported having been infected. Somewhere around 5,000 people may have died due to the disease or to influenza-related complications. New Mexico's indigenous populations, Pueblos, Apaches, and Navajo people, were hit particularly hard. Despite claims at the time that the disease was quote-unquote socially neutral, meaning that it infected all human beings alike, no matter their race, religion, or nationality, socioeconomic differences experienced by Native Americans and people of color meant that their communities experienced higher rates of infection and lethality. For the Navajo people, the influenza pandemic of 1918 and 1919 claimed more lives than any other event in their history, with the notable exception of the Long Walk and imprisonment at Bosque Redondo. As was the case in rural areas in New Mexico, the disease reached locations on the reservations where new technologies like automobiles and electricity had not. Although federal health officials arranged for doctors as far away as New York to come to the state, they didn't reach the Navajo Nation. Based on the experience of the influenza pandemic, New Mexicans recognized that their state needed a Department of Health and increased access to physicians. As the board recommended in 1919, quote, "At any moment, out of nowhere may come the black hand of death. Let us have a health department in New Mexico, not to institute quarantine, not to investigate conditions when an epidemic is raging, but for the protection of the public health and the prevention of disease." The state got a Department of Health, but that didn't mean that all of the inequities between our citizens were addressed. At present, a century later, the Navajo Nation once again has been hard hit without any ready access to resources that mean the difference between life and death. The Navajo Times has reported on the strength of individuals and families on the reservation who support each other in this dire time of need, but our situation underscores the various inequities of our present political, economic, and social systems. The 1918 pandemic was a wake-up call to New Mexicans to enact real and lasting changes that would transcend the moment and form a statewide public health authority. As we face our own moment of crisis, when our fellow New Mexicans' lives and livelihoods are at risk, what lasting changes do we want to create as we move forward? How will we rise to meet our moment, and how will future generations look back at us? Each of us has the capacity to make the decisions that will address those questions. What are our answers?